So, when I was in maybe 7th grade, I had a teacher who impressed on me very deeply the greatest commandment was the rule. And the crisis of my faith, the origin of my mature faith was exactly that. My saying, okay, I believe you. It's very important for me to love God. And it's equally important for me to love my neighbor as I love myself. And after a few months of trying that out, I called out to God in the night and I said, what? Why would you give us an impossible to realize command? It is not possible to love God enough. Not possible to love our neighbor enough. Not possible even to love ourselves enough in this way. Why would you give us a command to do something that isn't really possible? And the answer that came to me, and I know some of you have had words in the night, several of you have shared those words. My word in the night was believe. And I responded immediately, well, that has nothing to do with the question.
The word was what?
Believe. And I said that you're ignoring my question. My question was, you told us to love each other. That's not possible. Why would you command us to do something we can't do? And the answer was believe. And out of that comes the fact that I still have to fight with people. I have a lot of colleagues and friends who are non-believers, atheists, have rejected their faith that they were raised in, or whatever the range may be. And they all say, why are you still in the church? Because you're a thoughtful person. Why are you still in the church? And it's because I got that word long ago, believe, as the answer to the wrong question. We can't love God enough. We can't love our neighbor enough. We are always going to have a stone in the way, a log in our eye. We are always going to have that conflict. And out of that conflict is born faith, which is relationship, which is trust, which is living out problems and questions. I think this is right. I think this is wrong. Here's what's happening in my life. I'm doing, my family's doing, my friends are doing. That's totally separate from the question of I think this is right, I know this is wrong. Is here's my real life happening around me. What do I do? And how do I do it? And the way that I do it is relational. I relate to my neighbors. I relate to God. I relate to myself in ways that are worked out in real life. So my first point 2 weeks ago was religion is a living process. Religion is something that is lived out over time in my experience. And it is not something abstract, codifiable, endable. It is not something finite. It is something infinite in every direction. It is something infinite because there is no end to the absorbability of what is out there. There is no end to the fascination of what is out there. There is no end to the introspection. How much more can I see when I look more closely at myself? So when I get to the third part of that equation, love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as you love yourself. The third part of that is as you love yourself. And each of us, I'm going to go right out on a limb and say each of us has a love-hate relationship with ourselves. Each of us is impatient with, upset with, frustrated with ourselves for the things we do we wish we didn't do, for the things that we don't do we wish we did, for the things that we have failed to do in the past, the things that we worry about for the future when we know we shouldn't worry, frustrated with ourselves, impatient with ourselves. And at the same time, each of us really, really likes ourselves. My views are right, and my opinions are right, and you have to listen to what I'm saying, because here I am, roar, okay? And my wild yawp, as Walt Whitman said. That split between really valuing ourselves for what we know, what we experience, what we have done, what we are capable of, versus really not for our failings and so on. That dichotomy lives in all of us. And out of it comes all kinds of interesting convolutions. On the front, I have drawn these little drawings. God in boldface in the middle there is as though God occupies a larger-than-life place in your heart. There is God. And I am so dedicated to God. And God on the right with the thin handwriting and a question mark is, well, I'm not sure about this God. I'm not even sure there is God. I'm not even sure. And on the left, there's God, and God is part of the whole thing. And the same for them. Those people, I'm so dedicated to service. I'm so dedicated to my neighbor. And then, well, there's them. They're part of the world along with me. And then there's them. I care about them. Why should I care about them? They have nothing to do with me. They have no impact on me. They are neither me nor my family, to quote Christopher Smart. And then the third one, the same thing with me. Me occupies my whole heart. Me is part of where my heart is. Me? Why me? Why should I care about me? I have a little litany printed out, having grown up Roman Catholic, that I inherited from my grandmother. My grandmother had a lot of prayer cards and litany cards and all this stuff when she passed away. And this one is by Cardinal Mary Duval, and it's called Litany of Humility. And it's a wonderful little thing. It's a Catholic-style litany. It says, that others may be valued ahead of me, Jesus, grant me the grace to wish it. That others may receive a place ahead of me, Jesus, grant me the grace to wish that. And it has a whole bunch of this, like, let other people get ahead of me in line, Jesus, I wish I could wish that. And the whole point of the litany is humility, humbleness. Humility and humus have the same root, which is the earth. Abasing yourself down to the earth. Well, human has the same root. It's all from the same root, the earth, the dirt, the dust. And yet, on the back cover of this little handout of the Litany of Humility is a picture of Cardinal Mary Duval and his biography, and his name is attached to the litany. And in that rests a lot of our dichotomy this morning. How much of my wishing to be humble is really something more about me? When my former housemate, was confronted by this, she saw that I used this sometimes in my prayer life. And she said, well, that is absolutely ridiculous. And she came at it from the point of view of a woman who was raised in the South. Your opinions are those of your father until they are those of your husband, period. You have no other life. You have no other thing to wish as a woman in the South than to be good enough to have the ideas of your father until you take over the ideas of your husband. And she said, I have no use for that prayer whatsoever. I will not pray for humility and meekness. I will not pray for other people to take a place ahead of me in line. This is the place I belong in line. If I were to ignore her point of view, then again, what do I need to pray? Humility, right? So there's this constant battle between, I think of myself as a good person. How many of us? All of us. The trick is, all those people languishing in prison, same thing. I think of myself as a good person. And I think I have done right by me and the world. How many of us think the opposite? I have failed to do right by the world around me. I hope all of us. I hope all of us feel that same sense of failure. So here's the challenge that I invite you to use the back blank page for during the week. And you might revise it, and you might rethink it, and you might really meditate on it. If you were to draw a Venn diagram of mathematics class, you've got the circles and they overlap or they don't overlap, and how much do they overlap? And one of the circles was about God, and one was about them, and one was about me. To think about what is your real experience of your life, your heart. How big is God in your heart? How big are you in your heart? How big is your neighbor in your heart? And then I kind of cheekily go on to say that some of these might multiply. There might be more than one them. Well, this is the them that I think belongs to me, and this is the them I think does not belong to me, and then here's some other them that are in between. The same friend that I mentioned invited me to her Southern Baptist church for a sing-along, and it was a sing-along dedicated to the old-time hymns. We're going to get together and sing the hymns that they took out of the hymnal, and that they took out of the hymnal before that. And of course, I grew up Roman Catholic. We had 6 hymns, and they were all 4 of them was about Mary. But in the Baptist church, and I was encountering many of these songs for the first time, was the image that not only in heaven, but here on earth, there are only 2 people, Jesus and me, and nobody else. And I walked away so steaming mad. And I let my friend have it, and it had not, she doesn't own that faith. It's the faith she was raised in, and her whole church was there to celebrate times bygone. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and there ain't nobody else around, is the point of every one of those old hymns. And that's why they got taken out of the hymn. Because there is more to life, more to the religion, more to the world than there's my Jesus and here's my me. And we love each other. And you finish that. So how much do I really care about my neighbor as much as myself? Is it true? Is the third part of the greatest commandment. How much as myself? So turning over, Phyllis said, where did you get these words? Well, these are good words. My first pair of questions is, who am I? And investigating who am I, really thinking about that question is critical. It's critical. I came up through an Augustinian high school, and our motto was this quote from St. Augustine of Hippo, Noverim me, noverim te. If I have known myself, I will have known thee, O God. That some kind of honesty in confronting oneself, looking inside of oneself, becomes a window to God, according to St. Augustine. That's what it has on our high school word. So, looking into myself, there's a lot of varieties of that, and we can judge them. Narcissus is the Greek myth where the handsome young man comes to the side of the pool and he looks in the water and he sees this beautiful man and says, hello. And it's his own image, and he falls in love with his own image. So narcissism becomes the word that we use for when you are so infatuated with what you see in the mirror that you can't believe that it isn't different from yourself, that it is only yourself that you're looking at. So preoccupation with myself and my self-image. Narcissism works itself out in self-justification, where it becomes so important to us that people see us the way we see ourselves. It becomes important to us that you not underestimate me, that you understand where I'm coming from, and so on. In other words, let me hold up to your eyes the mirror in which I see myself. Then the second one here is omphaloskepsis, okay? And omphalos is your belly button, okay? What is your belly button really? It's the evidence that once you were made, you were worked, and not just made, but connected in the making to another human being. Your belly button is the evidence that you belonged to your mother. And it's the evidence of each of us that we belonged to a person who was working us inside. So when we use the word navel-gazing as a pejorative, we say, well, that's just navel-gazing. Omphaloskepsis is the neutral term for looking at your navel, contemplating your navel, thinking about and meditating on the fact that I didn't pop out perfected out of somewhere, but I had a due date, a born-on date. I had a beginning date where I entered the world breathing, and where that line between myself and my mother was cut, where that navel was tied up in a knot, and I was set independent. So on the third page, you'll see I've quoted Psalm 139. "O Lord, you search me and know me. You search out my path, you knew me." And it's very important to me that in that psalm it says, you knew me while I was in my mother's womb. before I was independent of that connection to the rest of humanity, you knew me. I was being formed. So in that sense, narcissism is about looking at myself now in that mirror, but navel gazing in that deeper sense is about, where did I come from? Whose am I? Who do I belong to? Both in the human sense and in the divine. Okay, then the third part is projection here, which is, where am I going? What impact am I going to have on the world? And each one of these can be taken to extremes in both directions. Can I imagine myself making a big difference in the world? If you can't imagine that, you can never be a Mother Teresa. At the same time, you can never be an Adolf Hitler, right? If you can't imagine having a great impact on the world. So that seeing the world as a projection of myself, my force, my personality, is not what creates good and bad, but rather who am I is what creates that. Obviously, greed is a key consideration here, where I want more than is in the balance for me. Here is what is right and just, and here is what I want. I want more than is right for me. Now, how do I judge that? Internally? Externally? That's something we talked about. Okay, who are you? You meaning the them, the other people, the neighbor. So if I really feel for my neighbor, that's empathy. And if I just want to talk about my neighbor, then that's gossip and dirt dishing and the rest. And very often in church leadership we get into this problem where we're sharing somebody's, health concern. We're sharing somebody's family difficulties. Why are we sharing it? Is it empathetic? Do we have love for them in our heart? Or is it just, I know something you don't know yet? Is it just gossip? So here I have this poem, this hymn from John Greenleaf Whittier. O brother man, fold to thy heart thy brother. Where pity dwells, the peace of God is there. To worship rightly is to love each other, each smile a hymn, each kindly deed a prayer. In Whittier's hymn, the transaction is between myself and my brother, my sister, myself and my fellow. That it doesn't involve talking about someone, but talking to someone, smiling to someone, caring for someone. So out of this relationship between myself and you comes jealousy, envy, and covetousness, which is all I want what they have. I want that. And out of those comes the impulse for greed. I want more than I deserve. I want more than I own, more than I earn. How many of you have been recently engaged in divesting, getting rid of goodies, getting rid of junk? Raise your hand high. Yes? Good. Talk a minute about it. What are you getting rid of? How and why? I know you're bringing books to me. What are you getting rid of? How and why?
Well, there's too much stuff, and I don't need it.
Right.
Someone else could use it. And at some point, I don't know when that's going to be, I don't want to take it with me. I want to start again with the least minimal necessities and things, some treasures. But I don't need 5 chairs. I need a chair for me, a chair for company. It's winnowing. It's sitting down and saying, what do I need?
Yeah.
What am I going to need now? And I don't need.
You don't need as much as you
I don't need as much.
have.
Yeah, that's right.
I think because we had, in the early years of our marriage, moved a lot for various reasons, we began to see, and were reminded recently, that the stuff ends up owning you. You got to put it somewhere, you got to store it, you got to move it, you got to clean it, you got to prepare it. So we're sort of, now that the kids are out, we're just sort of getting rid of that stuff that feels like we would have to deal with it, and we don't need it. So we're giving it to, and other people do need it. So.
I won't ask you to raise your hand if you have a storage unit. I do.
That's a terrible.
And a lot of people do in this country. You know, what you reminded me of there is when I started rowing, and I bought a rowing shell, this is years and years ago, and realized and learned firsthand, there's no such thing as buying a boat.
Mm.
Because I bought the boat, and I thought, oh, well, that's how much it costs to buy the boat. Then there's the place to store the boat, and the place to clean the boat, and the place to put the boat in the water and belong in the membership, and there's the clothes to row the boat in, and there's the clothes to where to get to row the boat in. And it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. There's no such thing as I've added one thing to my life, because all the things that have to go with that belong to it. And we have to constantly reevaluate. Who else is divesting? What's going on in your life, Judy?
I just find that there are so many things in the house that I don't use, do not really need, but members of my family could use. And if that's something they could use and want, then I'm happy to see it have a new location.
Right.
Then there are things like here at church, where there are things that are needed for purposes of people I don't know, but I know who could use what I'm not using. And this is a good feeling to do that. So that's what I'm doing.
So it's both. It's a good feeling about myself, simplifying, clearing out, clarifying, but also helping people who could use these things.
Exactly.
Right? Good.
I'd say just one word of warning though, because I pretty much gave everything away about 2 years ago. And now I'm going, where is that beautiful white cloth that I had? And, you know, I'm sure I had another set of silverware. And so now I'm having to go and buy stuff because I really thought I'm doing a clean sweep here. I'm moving into a tiny, tiny space. So I got rid of everything, but I was very cavalier about getting rid of everything. And, you know, like my beautiful 1973 MG, and now spring is coming, I'm going, well, Mama, I'm going to go buy another MG.
I think that there's a balance that's needed on every one of these points, and on this one in particular. What is important to me does not have to be according to another person's schedule. So the fact that, yesterday I went to the Connecticut Flower Show, and I shouldn't have gone because I should have been getting ready for this one. Fine. It was very important to me to share that time with my friend that I went with. And we got up there, and she saw these earrings, and she said, oh, my mother bought me this pair of earrings, and there they are, and I lost one of the two that my mother gave me, she said, and her mother passed away 2.5 years ago. And so here she is left with this. They said, well, if you give us the earring you have, we'll give you the pair for half price. And I said, well, that's the one she actually gave you. That's the one your mother gave you. And we had this little tug between us, because it meant more to me that was the physical earring your mother gave you than it meant to her. Where having the match pair and saying, well, they belong together, and this is the design my mother picked out for me, was more important than this is the actual physical. So you know how that goes, right? And you know how that goes if you've had, say, children's drawings on your refrigerator. What happens to those drawings once they've lived on your refrigerator? Do you really fold them up and throw them in the trash? And if you don't, then what do you do with them? And then pretty soon your kids are being given a big crate full of junky old pictures from 50 years ago. Right? How many of you have either received or given that crate? My sister presented every one of us with a big crate of junk from my father's house, because my sister was in charge of cleaning out that house. And by golly, did I need to see report cards from second grade? I don't think so. But there they were.
So, and Lorraine and I we moved a lot too, so when you move a lot, you tend to call as you go along. But the last year that I was in the Navy, I was what is called the geographical bachelor. So I was stationed in Groton, Connecticut, but Lorraine and the kids were in Alexandria, Virginia. And so every weekend I traveled from Groton by Southwest Airlines down to BWI, then I got on a train to get to Alexandria, Virginia. And inevitably, I would sit next to someone who's, if they were talking, in some ways changed my life. One woman in particular had just returned from Nepal. And she said to me, she said, we have so much stuff here. So she said, so living in a place where people have nothing, she said it made her realize, I don't need all of this. And so she came home and said to me, she said, I came home and I looked at my apartment, she said, which isn't that big, but I started saying to myself, do I really need what I have? And so she said she started culling down to the bare necessities. And she said, who said something about owning yourself? She said, that's exactly what she said. She said, I felt as if I was being owned by my possessions. And so I needed to kind of release it and let it go.
That's a great thing to have learned.
It was embarrassed to say years ago, the Lord gave me a message in meditation, get rid of everything that doesn't express you anymore. And that's a real challenge because I'm still working at it, but I'm working at it a little more ferociously now than I did a few years ago. But it's absolutely incredible to look at the things you've treasured that no longer express you, and then find a place for it where someone really appreciates it. Such a joy.
Yeah.
Such a joy.
Can you name one thing that had stopped meaning what it had meant?
Hasn't?
Yeah, something that stopped meaning and then you were able to let go.
Books are a big part of it.
Books.
Books, but yes, jewelry too.
Yeah.
Jewelry is wonderful to get rid of. No longer expresses you. I mean, not all of them.
Well, so jewelry is such a great place for us to think for just a second about that, because jewelry comes in several shapes and sizes. So-and-so gave me that, then starts to be completely separate from what the thing is, how it looks, how it feels, how people see it, because so-and-so gave me that. It's a special class. And you know, people who have been married with a very humble ring, and then on their 50th anniversary they get a nice, I don't know, something.
Thanks a lot.
By the way, happy 50th anniversary. And happy 92nd birthday.
All right.
It's wonderful when you see someone to whom that original simple band still is the meaningful ring, the one that they couldn't let go of, because it's the real one, the one we were married by, and not the one that came later on when we had everything under control. All right, I'm not going to get through this. The second set of questions are not who questions, but what questions. What is owed to me? What do I deserve? And inside of that, we can get self-negation and self-denial, which have been at times held up as Christian virtues very strongly, monastic virtues. At the same time, can be really a sign of a dysfunctional person. Someone who undervalues themselves, does not need enough. And that produces some kinds of warped personalities. And then in the middle, maybe humility and meekness, which the Sermon on the Mount says, blessed are the humble, blessed are the meek. They will receive. So accepting what I get. So humility might mean in that sense, you gave me a potato, thank you for the potato. You gave me a steak, thank you for the steak. I'm happy with what I received. Self-righteousness, exaggerated self-worth. How dare you give me a potato? How dare you give me a steak when I ordered the filet? Okay, so what is owed to you, my neighbor? What do I owe my neighbor? And here we get into the situation of patronizing others, which is such a major influence in terms of thinking about Christian outreach and missions, in service organizations. Do I only serve people that I see as lower than myself? does my serving maintain the relationship between my higher status and their lower status? That is a huge element in all charity, in all service, in all patronization. When do I become the patron, the father figure that must be respected, the great white father? And when do you become the dependents who can never become independent because of our relationship? So that is a huge issue. How shall I treat myself? In other words, what is right for me to do to myself? And here we get into, for example, hedonism and sybaritism, which is I value my own pleasure above all others. So if it makes me happy to go 150 down the Merritt Parkway, too bad if you have an accident, because I am happy driving 150. All right, so that is self-indulgent. I have a pleasure principle, and I don't care what the consequences are. And that can be internal. So I'm not accusing you of doing it.
It's a private joke.
It could be internal as well, when we're dealing with addictions, when we're dealing with dependency, codependency, when we're dealing with the kind of behavior that depends, even if your pleasure is derived from being in the lower position. So sadism, masochism, all of these things come into play here. How do I value myself enough, not too much? And how shall I treat you? And here's the quote from the Gospel of John. Nothing could show love more than to give up your life for your friends. So where does sacrifice come in? Where does giving my substance, my life, my power, my energy to another person come in? Yes.
This may not be exactly the right time to bring up this point, but I think what you're describing is a minefield.
Yes.
It's a minefield, because every virtue has its corresponding sin.
Absolutely.
And how do you thread your way through this? There's no final answers to any of this.
Absolutely. Every one of these, I say, ranges from, and I try to go from one positive extreme to the other, but there's nothing that isn't on a spectrum.
No.
You cannot say you should be humble, because part of being humble is self-negation, self-destruction. You cannot say you should be empowered, because part of being empowered is domination and the will to dominate others.
And you can't say, Lord, I'm so glad that I'm more humble.
I'm more humble. I'm much more humbler than you.
You see that all the time.
Right. So absolutely. That's, if there's any summary of today's lesson, that's it right there from Richard Troxel. It is a minefield. And in the same way, if you were to try and execute that drawing that I asked for on the first page, and fill in this blank on the back page with that drawing, what are you going to try and figure out? How much of me is in God? How much of God is in me? How much of God is in my neighbor? How much of my neighbor is in God? How much of me is in my neighbor? And how much of me? How shall I relatively value these things? How do I do that?
Namaste.
Namaste. So that's where I have it at the bottom. Say hello. This is how you say hello in a lot of the world. Shalom, salam, aloha. All three of these, the Hawaiian word aloha and the Semitic word salam, shalom, mean may there be peace, prosperity, happiness, wellness, compassion for you and for me. And that's why it serves as hello and goodbye. Because you're wishing someone wellness for you, wellness for me, and wellness between us. Every time you say salam alaikum, every time you say shalom, lehitrao, every time you say aloha, you're saying, let there be peace, prosperity, compassion, happiness. It doesn't only mean peace. When you say namaste in Sanskrit, that's the standard Indian Sanskrit greeting, namaste. It literally means the part of God that lives inside of me says hello to the part of God that lives inside of you. The dirty, fallen part has nothing to say to you. And your dirty, fallen part has nothing to hear from me. But the divine part of me says hello to the divine part of you. Namaste. And then here, African Americans, we heard this from Reverend Wilson in the Music on the Road to Freedom talk, that they call each other brother and sister. Do you hear me, brother? You got it, sister. Because of having been robbed of the familial when they were brought into slavery. That the family relationship in the biological sense having been torn from people, they said, we are family. We are family. And so call each other brother, sister. Well, that isn't very different from how we could think about each other. And then finally, Senegal. I have had the pleasure of visiting in Dakar, in Senegal. And there's a word that I didn't put down here. It's one of my favorite words. It's called phatic. P-H-A-T-I-C. And a phatic expression means the opposite of emphatic. Emphatic means I'm putting emphasis on it. It means something a great deal. Phatic means it's completely empty. So when you go up to somebody and say howdy, and they say howdy, it doesn't mean anything. It comes from how do you do, but do we answer the question? No. Do we want an answer to the question? Absolutely not. We say, how are you? And the answer is supposed to be fine, and it better be fine. When I got to Poland, and I learned, the equivalent of how do you do is jak się pan ma, jak się pani ma, how is Mr. doing, how is Mrs. doing? They do not treat it phatically. If you ask that question, you're going to get an answer.
A long one.
This is what happened today to me, and this is how I feel today. Right? And sometimes you get that answer, we get that answer, but we don't want that answer. We want it to be phatic. Well, in Senegal, which is a French colonial culture, you meet someone and you say, ça va? And they say, ça va. How's it going? It's going. How's it going? And then you look them in the eye and you say, ça va? And they go, ça va. And then you go, mais, ça va? The third time. And then they answer the question. And I was at a meeting in Senegal. We were playing, it was a business meeting. Every single person that came into the room, 3 times, to every other person in the room, the phatic ça va. Howdy, howdy. Then the earnest, ça va, ça va. And the third time, mais, ça va, but really. And then an answer. And I'm looking at my watch, it's like an hour later. Because that's African time. Okay, so there is a way of greeting that gets past the blank, gets past the phatic. Do you do that with everybody? That's not very white of us. But could you do that? Could you, looking at someone, say, are you really doing okay? I'm not sure.
Yes.
I think you can. I think you can. And that's caring for your neighbor as you care for yourself. Look at yourself, navel gaze, in the morning, in the evening, and say, mais, ça va? How are you really doing? And that's today. Thank you. During Lent, the middle 3 Sundays of Lent are going to be led by Diane Stevenson, and she's going to be dealing with some wonderful topic. I will not try to paraphrase her topic, but it will be an extension of what we've been talking about today. So the middle 3 Sundays of Lent, we'll have soul food again, bring some friends, and then during the Wednesdays of Lent, I'm going to be gathering a more or less silent meditation in the sanctuary, where we're only going to spend a quiet hour with God. Be still and know that I am God. Could you not watch with me 1 short hour? We're just going to gather, and it's going to be a quiet Lenten time. Midweeks Wednesday, 7:30 in the sanctuary. So that's what's coming up. Thank you for being here today.